I'll never forget the feeling of rage that coursed through my veins when I saw it. There, attached to the wheel of my boat trailer, like some kind of punishment from hell, was a bright yellow boot. Not just any boot. One of those heavy-duty vehicle immobilization devices that screamed, "You're trapped," to anyone within a mile radius. My hands were literally shaking as I held the notice that had been duct taped to my windshield. Violation of HOA Covenant 47B unauthorized. Recreational vehicle storage. FINE $500. Boot removal FE $200. Daily storage FE $75 until compliance. $775. For parking my own boat trailer on my own driveway in the neighborhood I'd been calling home for 3 peaceful years. But here's the thing that made my blood boil. I wasn't violating anything. I'd checked those covenants front to back when I moved in. I'd specifically looked for restrictions on boat storage because, well, my boat isn't just a hobby. It's my lifeline, my therapy, my connection to my late father. And standing there in my driveway at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, coffee still warm in my hand, I realized this wasn't about rules or regulations. This was about power. This was about one person who decided to make my life hell, and she'd just made the biggest mistake of her miserable little existence. Her name was Patricia Steinberg, but everyone in Willowbrook Estates knew her by a different title, the HOA Karen, and she was about to discover that some battles aren't worth picking. Let me take you back to where this all started. 3 years ago, when I thought I'd found paradise. My name is Jake Martinez, and at 34, I'd finally saved enough money to buy my dream home. After years of cramped apartments and noisy neighbors, I wanted space, peace, and most importantly, somewhere I could keep my 23-foot Grady White safely in my own driveway. The house was perfect, a beautiful colonial in Willowbrook Estates, complete with a circular driveway that could easily accommodate both my truck and the boat trailer. The neighborhood looked like something out of a magazine, manicured lawns, tree-lined streets, and that sense of suburban tranquility that I'd been craving since my divorce 2 years earlier. But there was more to this boat than just weekend fishing trips. My dad, Roberto Martinez, had spent every spare dollar he had building his landscaping business, so he could afford a boat just like this one. He used to take me out on Lake Hartwell every Sunday after church, teaching me everything from navigation to the patience required for the perfect cast. "Mijo," he'd say, his weathered hands steady on the wheel as we cut through the morning mist. "The water doesn't lie to you. People might disappoint you, work might stress you out, but out here, you remember who you really are." Dad passed away from a sudden heart attack when I was 28, and I inherited both his landscaping business and his dream of owning a proper fishing boat. It took me 6 years to finally buy this Grady White, and every time I backed it into that driveway, I felt like I was honoring his memory. The first few months in Willowbrook Estates were exactly what I'd hoped for. I'd wave to neighbors on my morning runs. Mrs. Chun from next door would bring me homemade cookies, and old Mr. Franklin would always compliment how well I maintained my lawn. Skills I'd learned from Dad's business, of course. I even attended a few HOA meetings initially. They seemed harmless enough. Discussions about holiday decorations, reminders about trash can placement, updates on the community playground. The HOA president, a retired teacher named Dorothy Walsh, ran things with a gentle but organized hand. But then Dorothy moved to Florida to be closer to her grandchildren. And that's when Patricia Steinberg stepped up to fill the power vacuum. Patricia lived in the largest house in the development, a gaudy McMansion with more dormers than anyone could possibly need. She was one of those women who'd clearly never worked a day in her life, married to some pharmaceutical executive who was constantly traveling, with too much time on her hands and a personality that thrived on conflict. She transformed our peaceful community into her personal kingdom within 6 months of taking over. The first sign of trouble wasn't even directed at me. It was poor Mrs. Chun, who received a formal citation for having non-conforming garden gnomes in her flower bed. garden gnomes, in her own front yard. Then it was the Johnsons, who got fined for having their garage door open past 8 p.m. while their teenage son practiced drums. But I figured if I kept my head down and followed the rules, I'd be fine. After all, I'd read every single covenant before I bought the house. I knew boat trailers were allowed as long as they didn't exceed certain length requirements, which mine didn't, and as long as they were parked in driveways, not on the street, which mine wasn't. I should have known that logic and rules meant nothing to Patricia Steinberg. The first shot fired in what would become our war happened on a Thursday evening in late spring. I'd just returned from a successful day on the water, caught 3 beautiful bass, and felt that familiar sense of peace that only comes from a perfect day of fishing. I was hosing down the boat in my driveway when I saw her approaching. Patricia Steinberg marched across the street like she owned it, which, in her mind, she probably did. She was exactly what you'd imagine when someone says HOA. Karen, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, designer workout clothes that had never seen an actual workout, and an expression of perpetual disapproval that made her look like she'd been sucking on lemons for the past decade. Mr. Martinez, she said, not even bothering with pleasantries, we need to discuss your recreational vehicle situation. I turned off the hose and tried to maintain a friendly tone. Good evening, Patricia. What situation would that be? She gestured dramatically at my boat trailer like it was some kind of eyesore. This vessel. It's becoming a concern for several neighbors. I looked around at my perfectly maintained driveway, my well-kept lawn, my boat, that I'd spent the morning detailing until it sparkled. I'm not sure I understand the concern. Everything's within the HOA guidelines. Her laugh was sharp and condescending. Guidelines are one thing, Mr. Martinez. Community standards are another. Some residents feel that certain recreational vehicles lower the tone of the neighborhood. That's when I realized this wasn't about rules. This was about class. This was about a woman who'd never worked with her hands, looking down on someone who'd built his life through honest labor. Well, I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger building in my chest, I'm sure those residents will be happy to know that my boat trailer is fully compliant with Section 12A of our covenants, which specifically allows for recreational vehicles under 25 feet in length when properly stored in residential driveways. Her face flushed red. Patricia Steinberg wasn't used to people who actually knew the rules better than she did. We'll see about that, she snapped, before turning on her designer heels and marching back to her fortress of a house. That weekend, I received my first official HOA violation notice. The charge? Failure to maintain acceptable aesthetic standards. The fine? $200. I called the HOA's management company immediately and spoke with a representative who seemed genuinely confused by the citation. Mr. Martinez, she said after reviewing my file, I'm not seeing any legitimate violation here. Your property is well maintained, and recreational vehicles are clearly permitted under your community's covenants. I think there may have been an error. But when I tried to get the citation removed, I learned something that would change everything. Patricia had recently pushed through new bylaws that gave the HOA president discretionary authority to enforce community aesthetic standards based on resident complaints. In other words, she'd written herself a blank check to fine anyone she didn't like. Over the next few months, the harassment escalated systematically. First, it was weekly inspections of my property, with Patricia walking slowly past my house, taking photos with her phone and making notes on a clipboard. Then came the notices, each one more ridiculous than the last. Grass height exceeds community standards by 0.25 inches. $50 fine. Boat trailer positioned 18 inches from optimal driveway alignment. $100 fine. Failure to remove organic debris from gutter system within 48 hours of windstorm. $75 fine. Each citation came with professional-looking letterhead and legal language that made it sound official, but I could see the pattern. Every fine was carefully crafted to fall just under the threshold that would require a formal hearing. Patricia was smart, evil, but smart. The breaking point came during a community barbecue in July. I'd spent the morning smoking brisket, my dad's secret recipe, and brought enough to feed half the neighborhood. I was actually having a great time, talking with neighbors who'd only known me through Patricia's propaganda campaign. Mrs. Chin pulled me aside near the dessert table, glancing nervously around. Before she spoke, "Jake," she whispered, "I need to tell you something. Patricia's been going door to door, asking people to file complaints about your boat." My blood went cold. What kind of complaints? She's telling people that boat trailers attract criminals, that they lower property values. She even said your boat might be leaking chemicals into the storm drains. Mrs. Chin shook her head in disgust. Complete nonsense, of course, but she's very persuasive. That evening, I found Patricia standing in my driveway when I got home from the barbecue, measuring the distance between my boat trailer and the property line with a bright yellow tape measure. "Patricia," I called out, walking toward her with deliberate calm, "what exactly are you doing on my property?" She didn't even look up. "Conducting a routine inspection, as is my right under HOA bylaws section 23C. I'd read section 23C. It authorized inspections of common areas and violations visible from public streets. It said nothing about trespassing on private property with measuring equipment. "I'm going to need you to leave my driveway," I said, pulling out my phone. "Right now." She finally looked up, and the expression on her face was pure malice. "Mr. Martinez, I don't think you understand your situation here. This community has standards, and frankly, some residents simply aren't a good fit for our lifestyle." "Our lifestyle?" I couldn't keep the incredulous laugh out of my voice. "Patricia, I own my home. I pay my taxes. I maintain my property better than half the people in this neighborhood. What exactly is it about my lifestyle that doesn't fit?" She gestured at my boat trailer like it was a pile of garbage. "People like you," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, "don't understand that owning property comes with responsibilities to the community, to property values, to maintaining the character that makes Willowbrook Estates special. People like you." In that moment, I understood exactly what this was about. Patricia Steinberg looked at me and saw someone who didn't belong in her pristine little world. Someone who worked with his hands, who had dirt under his fingernails. Sometimes, who'd bought his house with sweat equity instead of inheriting Daddy's money. "Get off my property," I said, my voice hard as steel. "Now." She smiled, actually smiled, as she packed up her measuring tape. "Have a lovely evening, Mr. Martinez. I'm sure we'll be speaking again very soon." 2 days later, I received the boot notice. But this time, Patricia Steinberg had finally pushed too far. Staring at that boot clamped to my trailer wheel, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was theft. Patricia had effectively stolen my ability to use my own property, and she'd done it with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for her actions. I took pictures from every angle, documenting not just the boot but also its exact placement on my private driveway. Then I did something Patricia probably wasn't expecting. I started researching. You see, running my father's landscaping business had taught me to be thorough. When a customer disputes a bill or claims you didn't fulfill a contract, you better have documentation. You better know the law. And you better be prepared to fight for what's right. I started with the HOA covenants, reading every single page with the kind of attention I usually reserved for fishing regulations. What I found was fascinating. First, nowhere in our community covenants was there any mention of vehicle immobilization as an enforcement tool. Fines, yes. Liens for unpaid assessments, yes. But booting vehicles? Nothing. Second, the discretionary authority that Patricia had given herself had never been properly voted on by the community. According to the bylaws, any changes to enforcement procedures required a formal vote by homeowners with at least 30 days notice and a quorum of 60% of residents. Third, and most importantly, Patricia had made a critical error. The boot wasn't just on my trailer. It was on my trailer, on my property, without my permission. In our state, that's not just a civil violation. That's criminal. I spent that entire evening on the phone with lawyers, city officials, and even the state attorney general's office. What I learned was that HOA disputes are usually civil matters, handled through mediation or lawsuits that can drag on for years. But when an HOA representative uses physical force to prevent a homeowner from using their own property, especially when that action isn't authorized by the community's governing documents, it crosses the line into criminal territory. The next morning, I called the police. Officer Sarah Rodriguez arrived within 30 minutes, and I could tell immediately that she'd dealt with HOA disputes before. She listened patiently as I explained the situation, examined the boot and the citation, and reviewed the relevant sections of our community covenants. "Mr. Martinez," she said finally, "I need to ask you directly, did you give anyone permission to place this device on your property?" "Absolutely not." "And based on these covenants you've shown me, does the HOA have the legal authority to immobilize vehicles?" "Not according to anything I can find in our governing documents, no." Officer Rodriguez nodded and made notes in her report. "Here's what's going to happen. This appears to be unlawful restraint of property, possibly criminal mischief, and potentially trespassing. I'm going to document everything, and then we're going to have a conversation with Ms. Steinberg." Watching Patricia's face when she answered her door to find a police officer was almost worth the week of harassment I'd endured. Her usual arrogant confidence evaporated the moment Officer Rodriguez introduced herself. "Ma'am, I'm investigating a report of unauthorized property restraint. Are you Patricia Steinberg, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA?" "Ah, yes, but I don't understand why police would be involved in an HOA matter." Patricia stammered. "Because placing a boot on someone's vehicle without legal authority isn't an HOA matter, ma'am. It's a criminal matter." I watched from my driveway as Officer Rodriguez spent 20 minutes explaining to Patricia exactly what laws she'd broken. The conversation ended with Patricia being required to immediately remove the boot and receiving a formal warning about criminal mischief charges. But I wasn't done. Not even close. That afternoon, I called an emergency meeting of all Willowbrook Estates homeowners. I'd spent 3 hours printing flyers and walking door to door, personally inviting every single resident to hear the truth about what our HOA president had been doing. The meeting was held in the community center, and I'll never forget walking into that room. 43 homeowners showed up, the largest attendance in the neighborhood's history. I could see Patricia sitting in the back corner, her face pale with rage, and something else I'd never seen from her before, fear. I stood up at the front of the room and told my story. Every detail from the first harassment about community standards to the illegal boot placement. I showed pictures, read from the covenants, and explained exactly how Patricia had been abusing her authority. But then I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. Instead of just complaining, I came prepared with solutions. I've spent the last week researching HOA law. I told the room, and I've learned that we have options. We can vote to remove Patricia from her position immediately with cause for exceeding her authority and engaging in potentially criminal behavior. We can vote to rescind the unauthorized bylaw changes she pushed through without proper community approval. And we can vote to implement new oversight procedures that prevent this kind of abuse from happening again. The vote wasn't even close. Patricia Steinberg was removed as HOA president by a margin of 38-5. The unauthorized bylaw changes were rescinded unanimously, and I was voted in as interim president until proper elections could be held. But Patricia wasn't going to go quietly. 3 days after the emergency meeting, I woke up to find my boat trailer keyed. Someone had carved deep scratches along both sides of the fiberglass hull, spelling out, "Go back where you came from," in jagged letters that would cost thousands of dollars to repair. My hands were shaking with rage, as I called Officer Rodriguez. This wasn't just vandalism, this was a hate crime. And I had a pretty good idea who was responsible. Jake, Officer Rodriguez said when she arrived to document the damage. I need you to know that we take this kind of retaliation very seriously, especially when it involves racial epithets. She was right. Go back where you came from. Wasn't just random vandalism. It was targeted harassment based on my ethnicity, and it proved that Patricia's problem with me had never been about HOA rules or community standards. It had been about the color of my skin and her assumption that I didn't belong in her neighborhood. But here's the thing Patricia didn't realize. When you escalate a civil dispute into criminal territory, you give your opponent access to resources and protections that go far beyond homeowner association bylaws. Within 48 hours, I had the police investigating the vandalism, the district attorney's office reviewing Patricia's pattern of harassment for potential civil rights violations, and 3 different law firms competing to represent me in a lawsuit that was growing larger by the day. The break in the case came from an unexpected source, my neighbor Mrs. Chen's new security camera system. Mrs. Chen had installed the cameras after Patricia started her harassment campaign. Worried about her own property being targeted, she'd pointed one camera toward the street to monitor her mailbox, but it also captured a perfect view of my driveway. The footage was devastating. There was Patricia Steinberg at 2:17 a.m., dressed in dark clothing, using what appeared to be a key or a sharp tool to methodically damage my boat trailer. The video was so clear you could see her face when she paused to check her work under the street light. But it got better. Mrs. Chen's system had been recording for months, and the footage revealed a pattern of behavior that went far beyond simple HOA disputes. Patricia had been conducting surveillance on multiple properties, taking photos through windows, going through people's trash, and even testing door handles to see if homes were unlocked. When Officer Rodriguez reviewed all the footage, her expression went from professional interest to genuine concern. Jake, she said, this woman isn't just a difficult HOA president. She's been systematically stalking multiple residents. This is going to be a much bigger case than we initially thought. The district attorney agreed. Within a week, Patricia Steinberg was facing charges for criminal mischief, harassment, stalking, violation of privacy rights, and, because of the racial language in the vandalism, a hate crime enhancement that elevated everything to felony level. But the real justice came when the civil lawsuit started uncovering Patricia's financial misconduct. You see, as interim HOA president, I had access to all the association's financial records. And what I found that was absolutely stunning. Patricia hadn't just been abusing her authority to harass residents. She'd been embezzling money from the community fund, thousands of dollars in consulting fees paid to companies that didn't exist, emergency repairs that were never performed, legal fees for attorneys who had no record of working for the HOA. Over the course of her presidency, Patricia Steinberg had stolen nearly $47,000 from her own neighbors. The FBI got involved when the embezzlement total crossed federal thresholds. Suddenly, Patricia wasn't just facing local charges for harassment and vandalism. She was looking at federal wire fraud charges that carried potential prison sentences. The final piece of justice came during the civil trial. Patricia's attorney tried to argue that her actions were protected under HOA enforcement authority, that she'd been acting in good faith to maintain community standards. That's when my lawyer introduced evidence that destroyed her defense completely. We'd subpoenaed Patricia's phone records, email accounts, and social media activity. What we found was a digital trail of her real motivations, laid out in text, messages and Facebook posts that revealed the ugly truth behind her campaign against me. These people think they can just move into our neighborhood and do whatever they want. Read one text to a friend. Someone needs to put them in their place. I don't care what the rules say, said another message. This is about keeping the wrong element out of Willowbrook Estates. But the most damaging evidence came from a recorded phone call Patricia had made to her sister, complaining about that Mexican with the boat, and discussing strategies to make his life so miserable that he'll move somewhere more appropriate. In court, watching Patricia's face as her own words were played back to a jury that included 3 Latino residents and 2 black homeowners, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my father passed away. A profound sense of justice being served. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Patricia Steinberg was ordered to pay $127,000 in damages for harassment, discrimination, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The court also issued a permanent restraining order preventing her from having any contact with me or coming within 500 feet of my property. But the criminal case delivered the real satisfaction. Patricia pled guilty to avoid a trial that would have exposed even more of her criminal behavior. She was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for embezzlement, plus 2 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and complete 200 hours of community service with organizations serving immigrant communities. The judge's words during sentencing have stayed with me. Ms. Steinberg, you were entrusted with serving your community, and instead you chose to abuse that trust for personal profit and racial animus. Your actions represent the worst impulses of unchecked authority, and the consequences you face today are entirely of your own making. Today, as I write this story 2 years later, Willowbrook Estates has become the peaceful community I'd originally hoped to find. We have a new HOA president, Mrs. Chun, who runs things with fairness and common sense. We've implemented new bylaws that require transparency in all enforcement actions and prevent any single person from wielding unchecked authority. My boat trailer sits proudly in my driveway, completely repaired and better than ever. But more importantly, it sits there as a symbol of something larger, the right of every homeowner to enjoy their property without fear of harassment, discrimination, or abuse of power. I still think about Patricia sometimes, especially when I'm out on the water casting lines in the same spots my father taught me to fish. I wonder if she's learned anything from her experience, if she's developed any understanding of the damage her prejudice and arrogance caused to real people's lives. But mostly, I think about the broader lesson this whole experience taught me, about standing up to bullies, regardless of whether they wear official titles or hide behind legitimate-sounding bylaws. Patricia Steinberg thought she could use her position to intimidate someone she viewed as beneath her social status. She thought her authority was absolute, and that people like me would simply accept unfair treatment rather than fight back. She was wrong on every count. The truth is, most HOA horror stories happen because good people remain silent, while bad actors abuse their power. Neighbors don't want to get involved, homeowners don't want to rock the boat, and bullies learn that they can push boundaries without consequences. But here's what I learned from my father's approach to business and life. When someone tries to take away what you've worked hard for, you don't back down. You educate yourself. You document everything. You build coalitions with other people who share your values. And you use every legal tool available to protect what's rightfully yours. The legal settlements paid for not just the repairs to my boat, but also a new security system for my home and a small college scholarship fund for Latino students in our county, something my father would have been proud to support. Patricia's house went up for sale 6 months after her sentencing. The new owners are a young black couple with twin daughters who love to wave at me when I'm washing my boat on weekends. Their presence in the neighborhood feels like the final victory in a war that should never have been fought. Some people might say I went too far, that I should have just moved to a different neighborhood or found a way to compromise with Patricia's demands. But I think about my father's words every time I doubt the path I chose. The water doesn't lie to you, Mijo, and neither should the place you call home. Today, when I back my boat trailer into my driveway after a day of fishing, I feel not just the peace that comes from time on the water, but also the satisfaction of knowing that I fought for what was right and won. Patricia Steinberg put a boot on my boat trailer, thinking she could intimidate me into submission. Instead, the police unlocked her future charges, and justice served a sentence she'll never forget. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well in the neighborhood where you belong, with your boat in your driveway, surrounded by neighbors who respect both the rules and the people who follow them. And that, friends, is a story worth telling.